Do you see that in the way that we're characterizing it? People might not even know that that connection to the Strait of Hormuz exists, but the pressures, the cost pressures from this war are driving decisions in local races here in Georgia.
I think that's spot on. I think definitely that was the case about not really making the connection of the Strait of Hormuz and gas prices a year ago. But I think now, it's one of those buzzwords everybody's familiar with. It's like, during COVID, nobody had really talked about a pandemic. Now people couldn't even see or find the Strait of Hormuz on a map. I'd say nowadays that's changing. I think in Georgia, especially in Atlanta, that's definitely the case in this election. Issues that were not traditionally part of the primary season or top of mind for normal voters, companies, people who work in companies. This is really kind of top of mind right now. You nailed it with the gas issue. I think that's kind of where this all comes to a head. In gas prices, not just for cars and trucks, but also airfare. Especially now, the primary season hits right at summer travel season, and you mentioned gas prices. But if you check your flights, everything's a lot more expensive now than it was, at spring break and even before that. Now it's only going to go up as we start to see the kind of trickles through the economy.
Well, yeah, and that's if there's jet fuel to fuel those planes to have higher ticket prices on said planes. So do you see, from your lens, having worked at the State Department, as any reason for optimism that this is a situation that might improve materially soon? Because it seems like every week Joe and I are having the same conversation. There is no deal. The president wants a deal. He's going to hold off on talks in the pursuit of a deal. But when's the deal actually going to come?
Yeah.
Well, depends on what kind of deal you want, I think. I mean, and that's the whole problem here is that, both sides have, things that they want. There's criteria that are in their core national interests, and it's hard. It's something that's normally not a short-term thing you do. It takes years. The previous rounds of negotiations took several years, almost a decade. I started a career working under the George W. Bush administration all the way through the end of the Obama era in a nonpartisan role. But so you see the behind-the-scenes machinations of how these things work. It takes a lot of time, political capital, diplomatic energy to sustain these, and there's a reason why it took so long just to get an interim agreement before. So it's really tough.
Well, now we're looking at a 2 or 3 day timeline, according to the president talking with reporters. 2 or 3 days, we could be striking Iran again. Does that hasten a deal or push it further away?
I mean, I guess there's a lot of things. These are complicated where it doesn't fit neatly in, especially in political season, like a talking point.
Yeah.
These are long, historic issues between the United States and Iran, go back decades. And, they're talking about issues now that took years to get to this point and then are going to take normally years to resolve. So, in the short span, you don't know. I mean, anything is possible. There's always room for, a deal, or at least pushing the status quo to I think everybody just wants to avert further, military action and further, catastrophe in the region and come back to some phase of normal. But what that is, the normal is not going to be the normal there was before the conflict. I think that's one thing people agree on. Like, what comes next is going to be very different than what happened before.
Well, and when we consider what a deal could ultimately look like, presumably Iran is going to want some material sanctions relief, and I know that that's a space that that you focus on. What could that look like in practice? Is it going to unlock global markets for Iranian products? I just wonder how we should expect that to unfold, assuming it happens.
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what that looks like. The devil's going to be in the details, but I mean, none of these things are things that can be resolved overnight, and the market's going to react. Especially when you're dealing in oil prices and energy. These are long-term contracts. It takes a long time for the impacts to be felt. And there may be some short-term impact in Iran and Iran's economy if they have access to frozen funds, which most of the, from what I've seen, that's been a lot of the negotiations around. This is Iran's money frozen in accounts. They get it back, and what do they do with it? That's not necessarily going to help the global economy. It might help Iran's economy, help them recover after the conflict, which in theory, the faster they can rebuild damaged infrastructure, the better that'd be for the oil and gas industry.
Well, so give us the corporate view on this. You've worked with some major corporations in managing risk around certain projects, including Microsoft. How do you make investment decisions right now in such an uncertain environment, or do you start betting on that new normal that you suggested? If we're not going back to where we were, how do you plan for where we're going?
I think you have to bet on the uncertainty continuing. It's one of those things where uncertainty is now certain. That's kind of how you have to look at it. So you can't really expect things to be predictable.
It's job security for you, right?
I guess it's one of the things where in government you wanted to be out of a job if you did your job right. All right, we don't need any non-proliferation specialists anymore. That'd be great. We won't have to worry about these things. But I mean, planning is key. But companies are trying to figure out how do we plan for this situation and what's next. I think that's what's the next phase of this is really doing more long-term thinking. And but the interesting piece of this is where these conversations are having. Traditionally, like geopolitical risk conversations, these are like grand strategy held at the White House and in capitals and then at the boardroom. Now people in the operational level are talking about these issues because now the people who are responsible for moving things overseas or importing things are now impacted. Things used to be the decisions the CEO would make would then kind of trickle down below. Now you're seeing things trickle up to the board. Because the people who are trying to export chips, like we can't move our stuff to build our projects. Like how do we do that? So now these conversations are happening across the board. And you're also seeing it locally too. People who don't normally care about geopolitical issues are now like really engaged in these issues. So and I think Atlanta is kind of the microcosm of that, of what's happening, in the United States and also globally, where we're home to a lot of multinational companies,
absolutely,
either American headquarters or the U.S. headquarters for foreign firms. And so the rubber really hits the road here. You're seeing a lot of conversations at all levels of companies trying to figure out what to do next.
You mentioned exporting chips a moment ago, and obviously we're fresh off President Trump's trip to Beijing. Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA CEO, is along for the ride. We know the U.S. has greenlit the export of H200 chips if China will allow countries to buy them. I wonder what you make of that decision and the entire conversation around exporting these advanced chips specifically to a strategic adversary and competitor.
Well, I'll leave the political aspect of that for some of your other guests, but in terms of the operational aspect, I think it is more uncertainty, I think, in terms of, for export controls are generally well understood. And they are well understood by a certain segment of the industries that are really impacted by this. But now, in the last few years, there's, with the start of the trade wars and tariffs and now export controls and other adjacent policies and regulations, there's a lot more industries and companies that are impacted by this. So we've never had to deal with this. And chips have always been regulated somehow, but not to this extent. So I think there's more now just uncertainty of like, oh wait, what can we do? Like where can we export these? And that, from the business planning perspective, is very hard because you have to plan ahead, knowing we need to buy these amount of chips from certain companies that make them and try to sell them to build our data centers or sell them to your resellers. That's really hard if you don't know what the final rules are going to be.